During COVID, like many of us, I took on a new activity. For me, during COVID, I became a baker, most particularly a sourdough guy. And the artisan loaves that I've begun to bake have become my go-to to kind of any potluck I'm going to go to, and they still seem to be appreciated, potluck after potluck. I relish and take pride in the product of my baking, but the most important part of baking is the process. Doing bread gives me almost as much pleasure as does eating bread. Baking sourdough bread has become a form of practice. Baking offers me lessons every time I do it. First of all, like most important things in life, requires that I do pre-planning and some preparation. I need some flour on hand and a bit of salt, and I need to nurture my starter. It makes me slow down. It takes several hours each time to freshen the starter, followed by 8 hours for a first rise, and then a similar 8 to 10 hours for me, often overnight, for a secondary rise. Between the two, though, I get to mess with the dough for a little bit. Then, and only then, does it go in the oven for 20 minutes at 450 with the lid on, and 20 more minutes with the lid off. And then if the temperature is about 185 internally, then it's done. Yet it's not quite time to slice it and eat it. It needs some time to just sit, to just be for a little bit before it's ready. I find the whole thing kind of magical and a minor miracle. Each time I watch how a pinch of salt, a few cups of flour, and some water, when blended with some naturally occurring bacteria, becomes dough. Dough that when heated becomes something tasty and nutritious. I'm a bit awed by the transformation that takes place. My artisan loaf is made to be consumed. It's supposed to go away. It's not, if not eaten in a few days, it becomes stale or moldy. The ephemeral quality of a loaf of bread is another thing that I appreciate. It's not an object to be held onto or displayed. It is simply for eating. It's deeply transitory. And when it is eaten, it becomes literally part of me, or part of whomever shares in my bread. It feeds my body just as the process feeds my soul. And as a bonus, when I get compliments, it feeds my hungry ego. Each loaf is also linked to breads I have made before, because they all emerge from the same starter that I carefully nurture and tend. I've had it for a couple of years now. It was gifted to me by a friend from the Eugene church, and I've gone on to share it with others. Several friends are now sourdough bakers, and I even took a little bit of sourdough to my son and his family in London, England. They didn't worry about it and, going through customs or anything. Sourdough starter was okay. It was a gift that I get to share, just as several years ago was a gift given to me. I got the original starter from Eugene church friend, Jean Marie. She made it by carefully tending a flour and water mixture over a period of weeks. She simply left it out. Then, when it became bubbly, she fed it so it would grow and gave some to me. Composed of fermented flour and water, a sourdough starter is a leavening agent that uses naturally occurring bacteria and yeast to make bread goods rise. Sourdough starters are lovingly referred to as a mother dough. I love that label, mother dough. Unlike other leavening agents, a starter dough isn't something you can go purchase simply at the store on the baking aisle. A sourdough starter is a living organism that requires cultivation and maintenance. When properly fed, sourdough starters live for years and give life to endless loaves of bread. Because sourdough starters depend on local strains of naturally occurring airborne bacteria and yeast, no two sourdough starters are alike. Jean Marie's and my sourdough starters have a unique lineage, part of a heritage, if you will, of sourdough. The metaphor that the processes of nurturing and sharing starter and baking and sharing bread offer to me countless lessons about patience and perseverance and regular reminders that transformation is possible. It just requires attention and some effort, and as in the case of so many things, time. Transformation is what sourdough bread making is all about. Transformation is what church is all about. My home church in Eugene has a fairly simple yet infinitely challenging mission statement. It reads, "Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world." Empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. We repeat it every Sunday. For me, the love that it calls for is a kind of mother dough. That love is the core value of our Universalist theology. Now, such love is not the kind of love that's portrayed in novels or TV dramas. It's not romantic love. It's a love that's both grounded and deeply grounding. It's a love that has existed since before the beginning and will never let us go. Some label such love as divinity or the holy, or you may call it the spirit of life. You may name it by any of a plethora of various names, or you might choose not to name it at all. For many of us, that deeper and wider love is love experienced within a beloved community. Now, that notion of beloved community is something that was often lifted up by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who had an aspirational hope that it could spread throughout our culture, and knew it was possible because it was something he had experienced his entire lifetime in church. In this congregation and in other UU congregations I'm blessed to be connected to, we seek to make that ideal of beloved community real. And we do some pretty good work up in that. Such grounded love is expressed in actions as the principles in our faith that all of our congregations covenant to affirm and promote. If you have not read them recently, I recommend you take a look from time to time. They're in the front of the hymnal, and you may want to look soon because they're in the process of being changed. I know from conversations with Sally that you've had conversations here about the proposed changes to Article 2 in the bylaws of our association. Our bylaws are our value statement, which in the upcoming version don't look as much like bylaws as some bylaws do, and I kind of love that. The amendments to those bylaws were approved yesterday at the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Pittsburgh. I looked this morning and had a hard time trying to find the final version because there were several amendments, but do know it'll be available online. It was passed by the General Assembly. It will come back again next year for a final affirmation vote of that statement of values. And to me, for the purposes of this morning's conversation in particular, the center of the visual representation of the values is love. Love is at the center of this faith, and we're saying that officially now. Love is at the center of our bylaws. How uniquely cool is that, right? Such love is a love that is so high you can't get over it. It's so low you can't get under it. It's so wide you can't get around it. You gotta come in at the door, right? You know, when I visit here, when I walk through that door, I find such love here. I experience that love. And no doubt you too have felt it here. The warmth with which you greet each other every morning is an outward expression of a deep love. You know? And our love is, boy, it's palpable during the sharing of joys and sorrows. Every time I'm here. And it's true in other congregations as well. And we take that love out into the world. It's been said that justice is love in action. I had the honor to feel that love on the first weekend of Pride Month, the month of June, when a dozen of us from the Eugene congregation traveled to Roseburg, all decked out in our yellow Side with Love t-shirts, and joined with double that number members of the Roseburg congregation and their friends to walk in the Pride Parade in Roseburg. Yes, in Roseburg. And Roseburg is at least, if not more conservative than this community. Evangelical church pastors were with speakers on the side of the parade and the big signs telling us what they believed would be the fate of our souls, a faith we do not agree with. And every time they would start preaching, the crowd would sing and laugh and shout. And the greatest joy of that day was the young people who live in Roseburg, Oregon, who could be fully out who they are and be surrounded by a community who loved them. You know, there's an old adage that says seeing is believing, but I believe believing is seen. You know, I know that love like that exists because I've experienced it. I've experienced it again and again and again, and it can be transformative. You know, like a loaf of sourdough bread, a loving, caring community emerges over time from simple materials and from the natural processes that feed love. Now, since we're talking about bread this morning, I feel compelled to acknowledge the profound symbolic importance of bread that it holds within the Christian faith tradition, especially in the ritual of communion, which, by the way, some suggest that it came from the potluck dinners that the early Christian congregations had every service. But it's become ritualized. And communion, according to Scripture, arose from counts of the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples. It took place on the evening before his arrest and crucifixion, as described in the book of Matthew. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." It's a powerful metaphor that some take literally. In the Catholic Church, as affirmed by the American Council of Bishops, they stated that the transformed bread and wine are truly the body and blood of Christ and are not merely symbols. When Christ said, "This is my body, this is my blood," the bread and wine are transubstantiated. Though the bread and wine appear the same to our human faculties, they are actually the real body and blood of Jesus. To a true believer, that is the truth. Transubstantiation, that miraculous transformation of bread to flesh, to the divine incarnate. Incarnate, by the way, means in the flesh. I mean, it's like, chili con carne. It's with meat, right? I mean, I was amazed when I found out that that's what the Latin, it really is, incarnate, with meat, is the kind of miracle that religious skeptics like myself, and I suspect some of the people in this room, find difficult to accept. So we tend to reject them. Unfortunately, in rejecting the literal truth of such a story, we miss the powerful metaphor that many biblical scholars think was the point of the story in the first place. John Dominic Crossan, in his book, Who is Jesus, wrote, "My point, once again, is not that those ancient people told literal stories and we're now smart enough to take them symbolically, is that they told them symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take them literally." Crossan is a New Testament scholar, historian, and former Catholic priest. I think an emphasis on former. His research focused on the historical Jesus, the theology of the Christian Gospels as stories rather than absolute truth. The stories found in the books of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament are valuable and profoundly meaningful teaching stories. When we reject them entirely because we question whether or not they are literally true, we end up throwing out the baby Jesus and the teacher he became along with the bathwater. We know that Rabbi Jesus often used metaphorical stories called parables to invite his listeners to think deeply about a subject or a situation. The story of the Good Samaritan is the best known of the parables. The stories are metaphors and bread, that nearly miraculous substance that feeds us, and so many things, like so many things, in the awesome super reality that is the natural world, offer to us powerful metaphors from which to ponder possibilities of what might feed us spiritually. I do want to note that I just said ponder possibilities and not find the truth. I would suggest if one were looking for a church where a minister or other speaker would stand before you and offer the truth, you're not in the right church this morning. Nor is this the minister you would want to be up here in front of you. Here we explore, in engagement with speakers and clergy and with each other, possibilities. We share stories of our lives. We share stories that we find meaningful. Now, I may have shared here before in the past some stories about when I had a very serious health situation. I had a crisis. I was intubated and unconscious for 4 days in an intensive care unit. Now, after I recovered, I decided, because I'm a seeker and like the person whose bumper sticker I noted in the parking lot, I am a friend of Carl Jung. I decided to find a Jungian therapist to see if we could uncover what might have been going on in my subconscious mind during those days when I was unconscious. So I looked in the phone book, And I found a therapist who was listed, and I called him up, made an appointment, and went to my first appointment. I found at the initial conversation with him that he, like Croissant, is a former priest who, after he left the priesthood and married the love of his life, went back to graduate school to become a Jungian therapist. We had a number of thought-provoking sessions, and even though we never did find any trace of what my subconscious might have been up to those during those days in intensive care, we did explore some of my dreams. One in particular I want to share with you this morning because it's so memorable. In that dream, my wife Suzanne and I had created a business where we were manufacturing and selling and eventually giving away burritos. He pondered and thought a little bit and said, I think your dream might be about communion. And then we both chuckled when he offered the observation. He said, a burrito would be far more nourishing than a little wafer and a sip of wine. And I think as a clergy person, I might have been in my subconscious trying to figure out how do I best help serve people's spiritual needs. And though I'm not sure about his interpretation, I appreciate that it offered me a possibility. Not an absolute, but just an interpretation I might consider. He helped me remember to look within for metaphorical stories that might offer possibilities. For I did not continue to see him long, for I find that I most deeply can do what's my spiritual seeking within community. And at that point in my life, I shortly thereafter joined a Buddhist Sangha. Whether I do my seeking in the garden or in my dreams or in kitchen community or in the kitchen when I bake bread, I'm blessed to have many, many opportunities to explore possibilities. We are gifted here with endless opportunities to see how you and me might together grow and transform ourselves and serve the world. May it forever be so. And just as we ponder, we're going to move into a time of meditation. And what we're going to do today is invite you to sit in a way that's comfortable for you, that allows the breath to flow most readily. For many, that's, spine a little straighter than usual, and a soft front as we breathe in and out together. And I want to share some words of meditation that come from a hymn in our Teal hymnal. We're just going to use it as a spoken word today, that I shared during my year as a hospital chaplain. And one time in particular, I was called to a patient's room, and was a very anxious individual whose anxiety was interrupting their ability to breathe easily. And I invited them to just slow down and breathe with me, inviting them that when I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love, peace, love. And they joined me, as today we will breathe together in a time of silence, followed by some music. So let's just breathe together, breathing in peace, breathing out love. Christine. And now we're gifted with music, Christine.